Jill, thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to be our first person today, and we're so glad you made the trip down from New York. You have a lot to share with us in a pretty short period, so we'll get started. You told me that Kristallnacht, which took place in November 1938, was the catalyst for the decisions and direction that your family's life took during the Holocaust and the war. You were very young at that time, just 5 years of age. Let's begin with you telling us a bit about your family before the war and during the events that led up to Kristallnacht, your early years for you and your family.
The only history I can really tell you about what was going on before Kristallnacht is what I heard from my parents. Mm-hmm. I do know that they kept me in the house for five and a half years. I didn't go to nursery school. I didn't go to kindergarten. I wasn't even allowed to play with neighborhood children. And not because, yes, because of the Nazis. They were not allowed to play with Jewish children if they were not Jewish. And I was not allowed to play with them because children talk. And a part of my family's survival was based on secrecy. They did things they did not want anything about their lifestyle or their behavior to get outside the four walls of the house. Mm-hmm. And I was a chatterbox. And I was very...
You were the chatterbox.
I was a chatterbox, and I had no company. I was socially... Children need other children.
Tell us about your parents.
My parents?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about them.
My father was a descendant of Sephardi Jews. That my grandmother told me that the roots of their family left Spain during the Inquisition and moved their way north. Whether they lived in Italy on the way, I don't know, maybe, but they landed up in Germany. No, the ancestors landed up in Holland from Spain. We don't know how long. I don't have any of the history other than what she told me. And from Spain, they wandered over to Germany, and they lived in a city called Krefeld. And in my grandmother's time, she was born in 1870, so her mother was probably born around 1850, 45. There were revolutions and expulsions that she had read about and that she knew about. And she passed that information down. She told that to me when I was a little girl. She was well-read. And my grandmother must have been, I don't know, I didn't know her in that light, but she must have been very bright. Because she was my father and my grandfather were cattle dealers. And from the day that Hitler came to power, she would not allow any business money to go to the banks. She didn't trust the banks, which was very clever. And she wanted the money that they had accumulated. They were quite well-to-do. The business was four uncles and my father. It was a big cattle business. And she was the boss. She carried it all on her tummy under her dress. And she said she wanted the money out.
Out of Germany.
Out of Germany.
Out of Germany.
We were Orthodox Jews, religious people, and nobody in the family was a smuggler. Mm-hmm. How were they going to get the money out of Germany? So this picture that you showed of my going in the mountains, that uncle took my aunt on vacation, and they met a Dutchman. It must have been 1929-30. No, even a little later. Hitler must have already been busy. So my uncle, because of my grandmother, asked him if he could help us get the money out. He was a very prominent Dutch Jew who had permission to go to the Queen. He was a court Jew. So they trusted him.
And this was the Queen of Holland.
The Queen of
Holland, yeah.
And he sent them a smuggler.
And that's how she got the money out.
And that's how we got the money out on the day I was born.
In 1933, the same
May
year.
1, 1933. And my uncle, my mother's brother, was sent to follow the smuggler to make sure he was taking the money where he should. Mm-hmm. And he got caught. They didn't let him across the border. And he went to called my aunt that he couldn't make it. And she said, well, you better come home. You know, you had a baby niece. So he came to the hospital to see my mother and me. And that man, I could sit here, my uncle, Herman, incredibly courageous. I could sit here and talk about him all day. He had left. And in 1937, he worked for the Berg brothers. That's my maiden name. Mm-hmm. And the business was closed by the Nazis. He had no income anymore. So he moved to Holland. He left the country in 1937 with his sister and brother-in-law.
And moved to Holland.
They were living in Holland, and they had contact with this gentleman. Mm-hmm. And later on, they became very important
to the rest of your
in our escape.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Jill, let me ask you, you had mentioned earlier that secrecy was very important.
Yes.
An example, I think, was the Nazis, when they came to power, it was forbidden to keep kosher once the Nazis were in power. Yet, at considerable risk, your family continued to do that.
Yes.
Tell us about that, how they
Well,
did that.
you know, a kosher slaughtering, the slaughterers are trained a certain way. Mm-hmm. And in my family, there were 3. And they were used to doing what they wanted to do. Very few people told them what they wanted to do. They were independent people, mm-hmm. normal people, and they liked me. And they decided they didn't need to give up the meat. They had their own. The only problem was where were they going to kill the animals without being given away. So one of the uncles had an abattoir where his part of the business was slaughter and selling the meat. Mm-hmm. So what did he decide? He had a righteous Gentile in there with him in the abattoir, and the 2 of them bound the animal, and my uncle did the slaughtering. And then he took a gun and he shot into the animal's head when it was dead, so that the Nazis next door wouldn't say that he slaughtered. They heard the shot that he killed the animal.
And if I remember right, the ritual knives used to prepare the meat they were hidden away, like up the chimney.
Oh yes, that was in my house where we lived.
Yeah.
The knives, there's special knives to do kosher slaughtering, different sizes.
So if the Nazis came to your house and found those...
No, they didn't find them.
No, but it would have been a serious matter.
Oh, they would have arrested everybody.
Yeah, everybody, yeah.
Right.
Tell me just a little bit about Inga, your sister's 4 years older than you. Mm-hmm. So in that period before 1938, you weren't yet in school, as you mentioned. Had Inga started schooling yet?
Inga had to go to school. You had to go to school when you turned 6.
Okay.
And she was going to public school in Leschenich, and she was being tortured by the children and by the teachers. And one day coming home, I don't know if she traveled with a bus, probably, mm-hmm. One of the boys attacked her, and she turned around and gave him a bloody nose, which was an accident because she didn't know she had the power to give him a bloody nose. She was 6 years old.
You've told me, though, that she was very feisty.
She was,
Very feisty.
oh, yeah, sure. And so she came home, and my parents decided that she can't go to public school anymore. Thank God. You know, everything happens. Children later were tortured terribly. So she was sent out of town to live with my grandmother, where there was a little schoolhouse, one room, where the teacher taught 4 or 5 different levels. He was a genius. All those kids learned beautifully. She was there for a year or 2.
Away from the family.
Away from home.
Yep.
And Kristallnacht, she was back home. Wait, I don't know. She could have only been visiting.
And let's
Because she had to go to school.
Let's turn to Kristallnacht. That
Yeah.
was the night of November 9th through 10th, 1938. Tell us what you recall about that horrible night.
Ooh.
Yeah.
First of all, I didn't understand what was going on. It was cold. And my grandparents had a coal stove in a very nice room on the upper level. And for some reason, in the broad daylight, I was in there with them, maybe because it was so cold. And a man knocked on the door at 9 o'clock. My father was dressed to go to synagogue. They went to synagogue every day, twice. And this was a righteous Gentile, a nice guy, a friend, and told my father, don't go to the synagogue. Don't leave the house. And my father said, why? He didn't know anything. And he said, something terrible is going to happen. Just don't go to the synagogue. And he left. And they caught him. And they punished him. I don't remember how, but he was
For alerting your father to what was
Yes, he
going
was
on.
demoted in his job. So then there was hysterics in the house. There was screaming and yelling what to do, where to go. You know, it was a bit late. And he had 2 old parents. My grandmother was in a cast. She had broken a leg. And she was 5 by 5. She was a heavy-set woman. And we weren't in that room more than 5 minutes, and she jumped out of her chair and she said, we're running away. We're leaving. Get the cars. Call somebody.
This is your grandmother.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she didn't know that at that point that if the Gentiles who would drive us would be in big trouble. But they had good enough friends who risked their lives to get us out. And when we left the house, my sister and I were screaming like banshees because we were separated from our parents. We got in the car with the grandparents, and we smelled smoke, and we saw flakes flying, and it was from the burning synagogue. It was only a block away. My grandmother, again, she was very bright. She put us on the floor of the car, face down on the floorboards. My grandfather put his feet on my sister. She had her feet on me, and we weren't allowed to move. And she didn't want us to see the fires along the way. We didn't. And it was a 17-mile ride to Cologne. And after about 15, 20 minutes, we calmed down. We stopped crying, and she let us get up. And I remember seeing the fires. Those were the synagogues and the stores that were burning.
And being vandalized like the one we saw in the photograph.
Yes. You know, what the family went through, the very first inkling that my mother and father got that they had to leave the country was in 1929.
So before Hitler
That's
came to
right.
power, yeah.
My sister was a year old. And my father employed a man to clean out the cattle, the places where the cattle live. And he was not fully IQ. He was low IQ, but he needed to make a living. And he came over one day and he said to my father, "See that wheelbarrow over there? I wasn't born yet. Inga was born. He said, I would put my wife, my young wife, and my baby in that wheelbarrow, and I would start to walk out of Germany."
He told this to your father?
Yeah. So my father, knowing that he wasn't, he said, "Why? Why would I take my wife and leave the country? This is my home." He said, "I went to a meeting. I was invited to a meeting last night." You know, they had those basement meetings. And they told me, and I heard, what they're going to do with you people. And I'm telling you, get out of here. 1929.
1929.
He went into the house and told my mother. And he said to her, "What do you think?" She said, "You know what? Children and people with low IQs tell the truth. Listen to him." Then he started working on trying to leave the country, and we didn't have anybody in the United States to sponsor us. That was one of our big problems. We had no relatives or close friends.
So you couldn't get the visas to get
We
out?
couldn't,
Yeah.
no.
Let's just to continue on Kristallnacht. So you fled the family home and drove to Cologne. Where did you go once you got to Cologne?
Oh, we went into an apartment where my mother's retired aunts and uncles lived.
Okay.
Some of us lived there, and some of them had to live somewhere else. But the men in the family on Kristallnacht got in the family car and drove the car for 24 hours. Didn't stop.
This is your father and uncles?
All the uncles.
All the
Now, I
uncles.
want to tell you something funny.
Okay.
I went back to Germany. It was the first or second visit in the 80s. And I went back to my hometown, and a lady came to visit me. And she said, "What was your father doing at the gas station on Kristallnacht?" I said, "If he was at the gas station, I presumed they were getting gas for the car." "Oh." And I couldn't figure out. She was 10 years old, and she saw him. And she was Nazi. She could have gone in the house and reported that she saw the Jews at the gas station, but she didn't. Luck. And I find out 40 years later.
Wow. So they gassed up and took off, and where'd they go?
To the woods.
To the woods, okay.
Stayed in the woods for 24 hours. And then it was called off the next day like this. All action had to stop. It was called off. So they came out, and they knew they were in big trouble.
And just for our audience, this was happening everywhere in Germany
Yeah.
that same night, as
Well,
well
we
as...
don't know what other people did. I can only know we
Right.
did. And I will tell you, I think a very large percentage of our luck in survival was based on having righteous Gentiles who stuck their necks out for us, helped us in every way for several years.
And of course, on that night, thousands of Jewish men were arrested, but your father, fortunately, with your uncles, they went to Holland, right?
Not right away.
Not right away.
They came to Cologne for the Sabbath.
Okay.
And my father decided he has to go into hiding, just like Anne Frank's father. He decided on going into an attic. And there must have been an attic in the same building where we were staying. And he took my mother and the two of us into the attic to sleep. And luckily, my sister had terrible screaming nightmares. He couldn't stay there. She would give him away. So that was the end of that. And then they got in a car and they drove 3 men drove into Holland. We were only an hour from Holland by car, and they got caught. And that was a very difficult situation. Very, very, very difficult.
So once they were caught by Dutch authorities,
Dutch
right?
Nazis.
Dutch Nazis, what happened to them then?
I didn't know until a couple of years ago that there was a party of 30,000 Nazis in Holland.
And they arrested your father and your uncles?
Yes.
Yep.
And on the other hand, they also saved a lot of Jews. So it was. They arrested them, put them in a prison.
So now here you are, your father and a couple of your uncles are in Holland, they've been arrested. It's your mother, it's you and your sister, other grandparents. Your family then, because of the events of Kristallnacht and all that led up to it, really sprang into action about trying to get out of Germany. Tell us what they did to get you out of Germany.
They had sprung into action before
even
Kristallnacht.
beforehand.
Yes, but it wasn't, not that it wasn't urgent, but they hadn't found the right venue.
Right.
We were in Cologne. The three men were in prison. They couldn't reach out. But my mother's brother, the one I told you about, who followed the smuggler, he was in Holland.
This is Herman?
Herman.
Herman.
And he was a partisan. And what he did, he would go to the water. There was a big water between Germany and that part of Holland. People used to swim across to save themselves. And he would sit on a bench at the water's edge with raincoats. He wore several raincoats. And he took newspapers, and he sat there and he read. And how he had the contact that someone was coming in, I don't know. Must have been an organization. And he gave them a coat and a newspaper and said, sit on the bench.
Once they swam across the river.
Just sit there on the bench, and after I've left, and you're dried off a bit. So that was him. Okay. Well, he saw them being arrested. And he followed them. And he got out of the car and he asked the commandant of the camp there, the police station, what are you going to do with these men? He says, what do you think I'm going to do with them? I'm sending them back to Germany tomorrow morning. So Herman says to him, you can't do that. He says, what do you mean you can't do that? You're not allowed by law, you're not allowed to do that. You have to have written permission from The Hague to send these people back. I know the law. Where he knew the law from so fast, I don't know. It worked. He says, okay, I'll put them back. And if you don't have the paper here by tomorrow morning at a certain time, they will be gone. He ran to this connection, the Queen's attaché that the family was friendly with.
Right.
He went to the Queen with papers, and she signed, allowing them to stay in a camp, at the detention camp in Holland, because they already had the papers to go to Kenya.
Oh, they did, okay.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
I just heard that from my sister. From my sister, I think, the other day with somebody. They already had some of the papers. They just needed maybe shipping, whatever.
So now they're still detained. They're still in a camp, but at least they're
not under the
in
Nazis.
Holland. They're not under the Nazis at that point. And you just mentioned that they had visas for Kenya. Tell us why Kenya as the place to go, and how you were able to get visas to go to Kenya. Tell us about that.
If people here would understand what the situation was, the pressure was like, if somebody had mentioned going to the moon, they would have taken that. They would have been the first people on the moon. They just wanted to get out and couldn't. The United States wasn't letting them in. Other countries weren't letting them in. And they wanted to live. So, where were we?
how you ended up in Kenya. What made that possible? What made that possible?
One of the uncles was married to a woman who came from a very wonderful, highly intellectual family. And her cousin studied at the University of Munich early in the 20s. And he heard Hitler speak on the street. And he let the family know that the day he's through with his studies, he will be out of Germany. And he went to England and started a chemical factory. And with a partner. And he brought out his brother in 1937 and put him in law school in England. I guess he hadn't finished his studies. He got his degree in England. And then that young man had to go to work. And he was offered a job by a prestigious law firm in Nairobi. So he went to Nairobi. So
that's your connection to
That
Kenya.
was the connection. And he had I learned this only a few years ago when we got the letters. There was a man in the law firm, a Jewish man, who was highly respected by the British. They trusted him. And he was able to get permission. They wanted a list. The list, if you read the letters, that makes your hair stand on end. First of all, they wanted all the money that the Bergs had taken out of the country to be forwarded. They thought that would be a good idea, so that they could use the money to buy the right place for them where they could be observed. And thank God nobody, that didn't happen. And then they asked for a list of people who we wanted to bring to Kenya. Naturally, the parents of the woman who got us out, right? And her sister, and my mother's aunts. 26 people. I saw the list.
So you were able to get visas for 26 people? No, okay, no.
No. They didn't want old people because they might become a responsibility to the state. But I don't know how they let my grandparents in. And they knew that they were cattle farmers, and the Kenya government was looking for white farmers to buy in the highlands of Kenya to keep it away from the blacks. The indigenous blacks were like semi-slaves under the British.
Under the British.
And they wanted really to make that whole settlement white. So they encouraged them where to buy, and it was very beautiful there. And they bought a farm. And when they bought the farm, there was enough money left.
And they being, tell us who they were.
Oh, the five families that got
Five families, okay.
Wait a minute. My grandparents, my parents, and 3 sets of aunts and uncles.
But but you're all still in either Germany or Holland at the time this was purchased.
No, the Dutch ones didn't come on the farm. They came later.
So tell us, I'm being mindful of our time, Jill.
Yeah.
Tell us how you got out of Germany, because your father is gone, your mother and your grandparents are, and children. How did you get what it took to get out of Germany? I mean, that was something you had to arrange.
Well, we had to go for papers.
You had to get
papers.
Okay.
Papers.
And those were costly, right? The papers were fairly expensive, if I remember right.
Oh, everything that the Jews bought had to be paid double. And they had money in Cologne on the bank. And during those weeks while they were waiting, the women went shopping. And my mother went and bought everything for us, clothing, for 8 years, 10 years, all ready-made, because you couldn't get anything in Kenya. But there were, I don't know how many, 10 lifts, 9 lifts from 5 families, lots of stuff 2 cars and sewing machines and refrigerators. They didn't want to leave the money in Germany.
So you're planning to take all of this with you to Kenya, okay?
But it didn't get there.
It didn't get there yet.
It was stolen at the piers. That was a setup too, you know. And 2 of them got out, 2 lifts. 2 lifts.
2 lifts out
Yeah,
of
yeah.
9 or 10 minutes.
And then we had 2 uncles that came after us.
And
Yeah.
just so our audience knows that not only did you want to buy the goods that you thought you might need for a long time, you weren't allowed to take any money out of Germany.
No, 10 mark a person.
Which was equivalent of a couple dollars.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they accepted all the rules. They just followed through. We had to go to the Gestapo amt a few times. We were kicked out once and then went in again. And papers, constant papers. And if you had yellow papers and you got to the train and were ready to go and the papers were supposed to be pink, bingo. You didn't go. So that was a big stress.
But fortunately, at some point, you were able to get the papers
And they were the right color.
and the right color, and to then start the journey. Tell us about
No,
leaving.
it wasn't that easy.
Okay.
My mother had a dying mother with lung cancer, my grandma. And there was skepticism about whether she would make it. My mother said, it's a long, hot trip to Kenya. Do you think you feel strong enough? She said, I don't care. If I die in the train tomorrow, I'm not staying here. And that saved my life. Because if my mother had stayed, we would have all been killed.
So if your grandmother had refused to go, your mother would have stayed and you would
Right.
all, right? And
That was luck. We don't know what these things are. They're just luck.
So once the decision was made to go,
Once
you
the
had
decision was
papers.
made, she had to be carried into a car and carried onto the train. And that was extremely dangerous because the Nazis had absolutely no interest in sick people. They killed them. And we wanted to stay together. So a man came who was related to one of the women going to Kenya, and he carried her into the train and into the car. And he himself had been in Dachau, and we left a month after he was released. And I just want to inject this, I don't know if you know it. One of the women who was going with us, her husband was in the jail in Holland. She married him during this time. She went to Holland and married him in the camp and then had to come back. I lost my train of thought.
Telling about the woman who married.
Ernie, Elsie, yeah.
And then she was.
Her brother came, carried my grandmother into the car and into the train. And he had been in Dachau, and this was a big risk for him. She went to and her brother was sent to Dachau. Her mother couldn't manage alone. So she made an appointment with the Gestapo. She was 21. And she got the appointment. She was a young, good-looking girl. And she went to see him, and she said, my mother can't continue without him. Would you please release him from the jail, or from Dachau? He didn't do anything. And the Nazi said, I'll see what I can do. And she left. And a month later, he came walking down the street. I mean, did she have guts? No, she had something else. I don't know what it was. But she just died 2 months ago. She was 100.
And so he was allowed to go with you
Yeah,
and leave with
yeah.
you. So you left Germany by train, and you made your way through Italy to Genoa. Do you remember that journey at all? Tell us about that trip. Yeah.
And that's when I grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my mother set us down and she said, you are not asked to go to the bathroom. You're not asked to drink anything. You're not allowed to fight. You're just allowed to sit still. And you'll be in the carriage with me and with Oma, and I'm going to watch you. So of course I said, well, why are you being so strict? What's going on? She said, the danger is that they might separate us. And I don't want to be even considered for that. And they had a plan if they were separated, but I can't tell you that plan, I don't know it. But recently, about 6 months ago, I remembered that the Gestapo came into the cabin, but I couldn't trust my memory. So I called Inga, and she said, yes, they did. They came to check our passports, or whatever they were checking.
Right. And
went out again. Left us alone.
So you made it to Genoa, and then you boarded a German ship.
A Nazi ship.
A Nazi ship, and the ship took you to Kenya. Tell us about that trip, because you do remember that, and particularly one incident that it was more than one incident. You had a good singing voice. You were a little kid, and it came to the attention of the ship's captain that you could sing. What happened?
Well, if anybody here has grandchildren and you don't know how to occupy them, just call me. I'll tell you how my grandmother occupied me for 6 years. We got on the ship. It was dreadful in Genoa. It was hot and stinking and dirty, and we had no money, and everybody was miserable. And we were there just over the Sabbath. Oh, I have to tell you about my grandfather. He was 79 years old and very, very positive about leaving, but he was strictly Orthodox, and he wouldn't eat even off a plate on the ship. So how are you going to get him to Kenya if he doesn't eat? So this lady I just told you about, she called an organization in Berlin.
The one who went to the Gestapo.
And the one who was a little, not aggressive, but that's the way she was. She called an organization in Berlin, and she ordered kosher meals for all of us for the ship. And the kosher food came to the ship. And we had kosher food going to Kenya, because my grandfather wouldn't eat. And by the way, in Jewish law, that's not absolutely, you don't have to keep that law if your life is in danger. But he didn't think that far.
He insisted, and it worked out.
It worked out.
In this case, yeah.
And once we were on that ship, I was so happy. I realized what my problem was. I was sun deprived. And I tried to sneak out of the house in Leschenich several times, and they didn't know what was the matter with me. I was totally sun deprived. Once I got on that ship, and I had the sunlight, food wasn't important. I sang. I kept myself busy. There was no other little girl my age. It was just my little boy cousin, who was a monster. He did terrible things.
And your sister Inga, who was 4 years older than you.
Yeah. And I was always in charge of this little monster. But he listened to me. He did. He didn't listen to anybody else. We were afraid that he'd get us into trouble. But I seemed to be able to deal with him. He was 2 years old. Inga stopped him. He opened a little gate so he could fall into the ocean, would you believe? And she pulled him back.
And so your singing caught the attention of the ship's captain, and you were asked to come and sing to the officers on the ship.
Yes. And what do you think I was singing? I mean, what did they teach me? I sang all the German folk songs, because that's what my grandmother taught me. But while we were in Cologne, the holiday of Passover came, and I had an uncle, a great uncle, who sang at the opera. He had a magnificent voice, and I loved singing with him. And he taught me the whole book of the Seder to sing in Hebrew. And I was singing it. It was right after Passover. So the aunts were terribly frightened that I would sing that Hebrew stuff to the Nazis. So they kept me up a whole night. I remember being in the cabin, and my grandmother made it clear, you're only to sing the folk songs. And I understood. And I think I remember singing once. But this lady who just died told me, no, you sang every day for 2 weeks until we got
They brought you back for encore performances
Yep.
night after night. So Jill, after a several-week journey, you find yourself arriving in Kenya, a place so different than Germany that it's hard to imagine. So what do you remember what it was like for you and your family arriving in Kenya?
For me, it was great. I loved it. I saw my father. He stood out from all the people.
Because he was already there. He was already
there. Because he was wearing a European suit and hat. Nobody else was wearing that. It was my father. And we were very happy to see him. And then he took us to a hotel where he had booked overnight. And from there, we went by train to Nairobi.
I just have to interject here. If I remember right, the day the ship docked in Mombasa was the Sabbath. And if I remember right, your grandfather...
Oh, yeah, I think so. He wouldn't leave the
your
ship or
grandfather,
something.
after all that, he wouldn't leave the ship.
He wouldn't leave the ship unless he could walk to the... No, they talked him into he had to get in a car. Okay. Because there was no way, and it was beastly hot. And he went.
He finally went.
Somebody got to him.
He got off the ship.
His son got to him, my father.
So you spent the first night in a hotel there?
Yes, and that was it. I don't know if you've ever heard this. My parents had each beds, and my sister and I were sleeping on camp beds, folding cots. And we had to sleep under mosquito nets right away from the first day. Well, we overcame that. And then at about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, my mother shrieked horrifically. And we didn't know what was going on. A black man in a long white coat and a fez, a red fez. It was the traditional thing to serve ladies tea at 6 o'clock in the morning. And my mother said, I don't like tea. Please, and she couldn't talk Swahili. She couldn't tell him to leave. It was a riot.
Now, for our audience, Kenya was a British colony. It was under control of the British. So once you were there, it wasn't long before you were actually, your family, you were labeled enemy aliens.
Yes, it took about 6 weeks.
Yeah, and so why were you considered enemy aliens? You're escaping Nazi Germany, so here you are, and you're called enemy. You're enemies of the British. What did that mean?
I learned that here in this institution 50 years later. There were people who stole identities. They stole Jewish identities, I guess. And they were criminals, they were spies. And the British were terrified of letting
the German spies, yeah.
letting them in. So they treated everybody alike.
Who was German?
Who was German.
Who was German.
We were enemies of the state. The fact that they were after the Jews didn't interest them. They were afraid that there were people amongst us who were spying for Germany. So my father got there a month earlier and had rented a huge house where we could live until we were settled on a farm. And one day, we were there a very short time, maybe a month. A black truck comes up and arrests all the men. And they were going to take my grandfather. And my grandmother said, well, if you have to take him, you have to take me because I'm his caretaker. So they left him behind. He didn't look like a spy. Nor did anybody else. So they had to go to an internment camp again. But because they had put a down payment on the farm, we weren't on it yet, I don't think. They just bought it. They were released because they would know where they are. And then once they were on the farm and the war broke out, they all had to do army service. For the British property owners who were sent to fight, the refugees had to take over and manage their farms, in addition to if they had their own. So that was part of the war effort.
So because the British had to go join the army, your family had, and others had to take care of their farms.
Part of the war effort.
Part of the war effort.
They bought a gorgeous farm. It was 7,500 feet high. On one side where we lived, we could see Mount Kenya from our front porch. And if I walked up a path to the other house on a beautiful day, I would see Kilimanjaro. But I looked at it for a very long time before I knew it was Kilimanjaro. It was so huge that you couldn't picture it.
Jill, you're describing briefly, and you said you were happy when you got there, but it wasn't as easy as that for you.
No, it was very difficult.
It was very difficult for you when you
For
first got there.
people who didn't speak the language and didn't know British customs and didn't speak Swahili.
Yep.
And you couldn't manage the farm without the help of the black people. But they were wonderful. They were these people who were uneducated. They were so kind-hearted and so helpful. I loved them from day one, and I've always remembered them.
And at the same time, you didn't feel well treated, at least in the beginning, by the British at all.
No. We were enemy aliens throughout. My father was a descendant of Sephardi Jews, my father's side, and he was one of the people who had very dark hair and brown eyes and olive skin. And he was considered a black man. And wherever we went in Nairobi, he was kicked out. He used to come and visit us. We had to be boarded out to go to school. And he never came near the school, and he would tell us where the hotel was, where we could come and spend time with him. And when we got there, he was always sitting outside. And I would ask him, Papa, why aren't you inside? He said, because I got kicked out. They kicked him out. If you didn't have snow white skin, you were colored.
Jill, during that time, do you know if your family had any contact with family members back in Germany? No.
They got letters for the first year, 1940, and then the letters stopped. And we knew nothing about what was happening with the Jews.
So you knew nothing about that, yeah.
It wasn't on the radio. And we had a radio on a battery that my uncle only allowed to be used 15 minutes a day at night to hear the news. So we heard the news of the war. And we heard Churchill an awful lot. But it was not mentioned. No camps, nothing. Now, my grandmother died in March 1945, and the war was over in May. And I thank God every day of my life that she didn't live to hear what happened to her family. She had, I don't know how many, 4 or 5 brothers and sisters. No, she came from 8 children. I think 5 were living when we left. And they all went to the camps. They were all transported to Theresienstadt.
Her entire family.
Yeah, her entire family.
Jill, you spent I think 7 years, I believe, in Kenya, but then your family left. Tell us, in the little time we have left, tell us why you then left Kenya, why the United States, and what that was like for you.
Well, our treatment in school, for me, not for my sister, was horrendous. The teachers were anti-Semitic. They beat me. I was tortured by a girl who went through school with me, now I would say she was a depressed child, who was beastly, called me dirty Jew every day. And I put up with it. Not that I was sanguine or anything, but I knew it would be better not to get into it with her. Then one day, She hit me on the hockey field in my shin with a hockey stick. Oh, the pain was just unbearable. I beat the crap out of her. I didn't use a hockey stick. And I think what was behind it was that I knew we were leaving the country. So if they kicked me out of school, it wouldn't be so bad. But she finally got it from me. And I was pulled in, and I was told I couldn't do that. I said, couldn't do what? You can't just beat people like that. I said, I didn't beat her. She hit me with a hockey stick. Nothing happened to me. And then on the way out, the gym teacher, we had gym constantly 3 days a week after school when we were in Houston. I was very athletic. Had to be. And the teacher came and put her arms around me, and she said, Jill, we can't behave that way. I said, what's the matter with you? She hit you too, the teacher? No, she said, I'm Jewish. She was a hidden Jew. I didn't know she was Jewish.
You didn't know that, yeah?
No. And I had a very rough time.
Yeah. So
with the schooling.
Why did you leave Kenya and come to the United States?
Oh, my father left because of the two of us. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to send us. Inge had matriculated. We went to feeder schools to Oxford and Cambridge.
Oh, so your education would have had to continue in England?
Inge's. Okay. Because she was accepted at both. Okay. And he didn't want to separate from us. So he said he was leaving the country. And my mother wanted to leave. Mm-hmm. So we left. Came to America in 1947.
2 years after the war ended.
It was 7 weeks on a boat.
Yeah. I think, Jill, we probably have time. There's so much more you could tell us about coming to the United States. And again, you've been uprooted from one culture to an entirely different. Fortunately, by then you spoke English because of being in the English school system. So language wasn't as much of a problem when you came to the United States.
No language problem. In the first year in school, I had my legs up and got straight A's. I became a salutatorian, no? I didn't do anything. I was way ahead.
Yep.
I was misplaced because the principal of the high school in Vineland, New Jersey, did not like immigrants. They were hard work. Mm-hmm. They had to adjust. So she said, no, she has to be put down for a year because she hasn't studied American history. And guess what? I didn't study it after she let me in either. Didn't like history. Didn't like history till I was full grown and read it all.
Yep. And still ended up salutatorian, right?
Pardon?
And still ended up salutatorian, you said. Right? Yep. One last question before we close. It wasn't very long ago that you came into a whole bunch of letters, I think 58 letters, that had been written by family members between Kenya, England, and Germany. And you described it to me that reading these letters has been very painful and emotional for you. Oh. Say a little bit about that.
Anything that has to do with what happened then comes forward to you later in life. You've worked it through. You worked it through so you could lead a normal life. And then when this stuff comes back to you, get sick. Mm-hmm. When I saw my father's signature thanking the man for saving his life, I was just overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. Something else happened a couple of months ago. Kurt's second cousins found him here in the museum through a picture that I had donated with his name on it. And they came to visit. They were lovely guys, and they stayed in touch. And around December, they let me know that they're going back to Germany. They're going to Würzburg to look. Their mother, their grandmother and grandfather died very young, and Kurt's cousin became an orphan, and these are his children. the orphans' children who were born in Israel. So they went back to do genealogy. They had it all done. I mean, they had someone in Germany who did research for them before they came. They found the graves. They put up a memorial plaque. And they wrote me all the things they did. I was sick for a week. The stuff that comes back is very painful because I thought I'd worked it through.
And did you read all those letters that you got?
No, I can't,
You can't,
because some of them are not legible.
Okay.
But I read plenty.
We're going to close our program in just a few minutes. I'm sorry we didn't have time for question and answers today, but when Jill finishes, which she will do in a moment, she will remain on the stage, and so we invite any of you who want to come up on stage, just meet her if you want, or use it as an opportunity to ask a question, or take a photograph with her, so please feel free to come up here. We welcome that, we encourage that. I want to thank all of you for being with us, remind you that we'll have a first-person program each Wednesday and Thursday through the middle of August, and so we hope you come back. All of our programs in April will be live streamed, plus all of our programs will be recorded, and you can find them on the museum's YouTube channel as well. It's our tradition at First Person that our first person gets the last word. And so on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jill, and she'll close the program. And again, please feel free to come and talk to her afterwards.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay.